The silence in our house had a texture. It wasn't the crisp, expectant silence of a library, nor the peaceful quiet of a sleeping home. It was a thick, woolen silence, woven over years from threads of unasked questions and unspoken resentments. It muffled the sharp edges of our lives, insulating us from the friction that might have sparked a fight, or perhaps a conversation. On that particular evening, it felt heavier than usual. I was performing my nightly ritual of absorption, my body a lazy arc on the worn velvet of the couch, my mind adrift in the digital sea of headlines. Across the room, a chasm of beige carpet between us, Jessica was doing the same, though her medium was analog. She turned the glossy pages of a magazine with a soft, rhythmic shush, a sound that had become as much a part of our evening soundscape as the hum of the refrigerator. The air between us wasn't hostile, not actively. It was something far more insidious. It was null. The kind of void that grows when two people take each other's presence as a given, like a piece of furniture you no longer see, but would certainly trip over in the dark. I remember the precise moment the null was broken. I had glanced at the clock on the cable box, its green digits glowing an indifferent 9:47 p.m. It was the hour of decision. Surrender to the gentle pull of sleep or commit to the lukewarm embrace of another streamed episode. That's when her voice cut through the woolen quiet. "I'm going out." The words were so casual, so devoid of context, they barely registered. It was as if a character in the background of a film had suddenly delivered a pivotal line. I looked up from my phone, my thumb frozen mid-scroll. Jessica was standing now, smoothing the hem of a dress I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't just a dress, it was the dress. A slip of black silk that seemed to pour over her frame rather than simply hang from it. It was a statement, a weapon, a memory. It was the dress from our third date, the one that had made me forget my own name. The one she'd retired years ago, declaring it belonged to a different version of herself. Seeing it now was like finding a relic from a forgotten civilization in our living room. "Out," I managed, my brain struggling to bridge the gap between the Jessica in the magazine and the woman standing before me. "Out where?" "Just a party," she replied, her back still to me as she adjusted a strap. The movement was fluid, practiced, as if she'd been rehearsing this departure. My own posture straightened. The comfortable slouch I'd inhabited all evening felt suddenly inappropriate. "A party? It's almost 10. She finally turned, her eyes meeting mine. There was no warmth in them, no shared amusement at the absurdity of a late-night decision. There was only a cool, flat patience, the kind one reserves for a slightly dull child. "So? It's not a big deal, Alex." "Not a big deal." Asterisk the phrase ricocheted around the silent room. Since when was anything Jessica did not a big deal? This was a woman who planned grocery lists like military campaigns, who color-coded her calendar. Spontaneity was not in her vocabulary, especially not this brand of late-night, high-drama spontaneity. "Who's throwing it?" I asked, trying to anchor my voice, to keep the tremor of disbelief from showing. She waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that felt both rehearsed and deeply insulting. "Just some friends." Alarm bells, muffled for years by the woolen silence, began to clang in my head. "Just some friends" was not a Jessica answer. A Jessica answer would have been, "It's Sarah from accounting. You remember, the one with the terrible taste in shoes? Her husband, Mark, got a promotion, so they're having a small get-together at their place on Elm Street, but I told her we probably wouldn't stay late." The vagueness was a declaration of war. It was a carefully constructed wall, and I was on the wrong side of it. "Jessica," I said, my voice firmer now, pushing against the new tension in the room. "This feels sudden. Is everything okay?" A flicker of something crossed her face, annoyance, maybe even contempt. Her eyes narrowed. "Everything's fine, Alex. I just feel like going out." "Do I need your permission now? Is that a new rule?" The defensiveness was a slap. It was so out of character, so aggressive, it knocked the wind out of me. "No, of course not," I said, retreating instantly. "It's just, you don't usually, not this late." She sighed, a gust of exasperation that seemed to suck all the remaining air from the room. "Well, I am tonight. I don't need you to babysit me. I'll be back later." With that, she turned, snatched her small silver clutch from the entryway table, and walked to the door. I watched her go, my body locked in place on the couch, my stomach a tight, cold knot of dread. The sharp, Decisive click of the door latch felt like a judgment. The sound of her heels, not the sensible flats she wore for errands, but sharp, stiletto heels, tapped a staccato rhythm down the hallway. Each click a tiny hammer blow against the foundation of our life together. Long after the sound faded, I remained on the couch. The house, which moments before had been filled with a familiar, comfortable silence, was now echoing with a new, menacing one. This wasn't Jessica needing a break. This wasn't a woman blowing off steam. The woman in that dress, with that coldness in her eyes, was a stranger. And as the minutes bled into an hour, a cold certainty began to crystallize in my chest. She hadn't just walked out of the house. She had walked out of our marriage. The hours that followed were a masterclass in self-torture. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the hall was an accusation. Tick. Why didn't you ask more questions? Tock. Why did you let her go? The house, stripped of her presence, seemed to conspire against me. The empty space on the armchair where she'd been sitting felt like a wound. The half-finished glass of water on the end table was an artifact of a life that had existed only an hour before. My mind became a frantic courtroom, with me as the prosecutor, judge, and jury. Exhibit A, the dress. It wasn't just a garment. It was a narrative. It spoke of a time when our life was vibrant, when she dressed for me, for us. Tonight, she had worn it like armor, a declaration that she was reclaiming a part of herself I no longer had access to. It was a costume for a role she was playing in a story that didn't include me. Exhibit B, the vague answers. A party. Some friends. These were not slips of the tongue. They were carefully chosen shields. Jessica was a cartographer of details. She mapped out her days, her conversations, her feelings. For her to offer such a barren landscape of information was a deliberate act of exclusion. She was drawing a border and daring me to cross it. By midnight, the rationalizations had worn thin. Asterisk, maybe she's just feeling restless. Maybe she met up with old college friends. Asterisk, the excuses felt like cheap plaster trying to patch a gaping hole in a wall. I was pacing now, a worn path materializing in the carpet between the couch and the window. I'd pick up my phone, my thumb hovering over her contact, my mind rehearsing and discarding a dozen different messages. Are you okay? Too needy. Where are you? Too controlling. Just checking in. Too pathetic. What would I even say? The truth was, my questions weren't about her safety. They were about my own. Asterisk, are you with someone else? Are you lying to me? Is our life a lie? Asterisk. I sank back onto the couch, the worn velvet offering no comfort. I forced myself to look back, to trace the path that had led us here. When had the silence between us shifted from comfortable to cavernous? It hadn't happened overnight. It was a slow erosion, a gradual drifting apart disguised as the comfortable routine of marriage. Our conversations had become transactional exchanges of information, mortgage payments, grocery lists, whose turn it was to take out the recycling. The laughter that once filled these rooms had been replaced by the blue glow of separate screens. The passion, once a roaring fire, had dwindled to a pilot light, and I hadn't even noticed when it had finally flickered and died. I had mistaken the absence of conflict for the presence of peace. I had told myself this was what long-term commitment looked like, a quiet, predictable companionship. I never once considered that for Jessica. It might have felt like a cage. The clock struck 2. The city outside had quieted to a low hum. I felt a profound, chilling loneliness, the kind that makes you feel like the last person on earth. My thoughts grew darker. I pictured her laughing in a crowded room, the black dress shimmering under low lights. I pictured a man's hand on the small of her back. The image was so vivid, so visceral, it made me physically sick. At 2:13 a.m., a key scraped in the lock. My entire body went rigid. I didn't move from the couch, didn't even breathe. The door swung open, and she stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the change in her. The confident, defiant woman who had left hours ago was gone. In her place was someone altered. Her hair, usually so perfect, was slightly disheveled. Her mascara was smudged beneath her eyes in a way that was too deliberate to be accidental. She carried the scent of cold night air and a perfume that wasn't hers. Her eyes met mine across the dim room, and for a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of panic. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of weary annoyance. "You're still up," she stated. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. Couldn't sleep. Long night, she said with a dismissive shrug, dropping her clutch on the counter with a soft thud. She offered nothing more. No stories, no anecdotes, no details. The wall was still there, higher and thicker than before. Did you have fun? The words felt like stones in my mouth, heavy and unnatural. Yeah, she replied, kicking off the stiletto heels. They hit the hardwood floor with 2 sharp cracks. It was fine. Fine star. The word was a masterpiece of indifference. 4 hours in a show-stopping dress, out until the dead of night, and the only adjective she could summon was fine. It was more damning than any confession. It was a clear, brutal statement that whatever had happened tonight, wherever she had been, was a world away from me, a world to which I was not privy and whose details were not worth sharing. She moved past me toward the bedroom without another word, as if I were just another piece of furniture to be navigated. I listened to the sound of the bathroom door closing, the rush of water from the tap. When she emerged minutes later, stripped of the dress and the makeup, she looked like my wife again. But it was an illusion. She slipped into bed, turned her back to my side, and the lamp clicked off, plunging the room into darkness. I remained on the couch, shrouded in the gloom. Lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that this wasn't just about a party. It was a eulogy. Jessica hadn't just come home late. She had returned from a different life, and she had forgotten to close the door behind her. For the first time in our 5-year marriage, I felt like an intruder in my own home, a stranger sleeping next to a stranger. And the question that had been whispering at the edge of my consciousness all night began to scream. What else was she hiding? The morning after was an exercise in strained civility. Jessica moved through the kitchen with a practiced calm, the picture of a wife starting another ordinary day. She poured coffee, toasted a bagel, and scrolled through her phone, her face a serene, unreadable mask. The black dress was gone, replaced by comfortable sweats, but its ghost lingered in the air between us. I watched her over the rim of my own coffee mug, searching for a crack in the facade. A nervous twitch, a shadow of guilt in her eyes, anything. There was nothing. It was this nonchalance that was most terrifying. It suggested that the previous night wasn't an anomaly. It was a part of a new reality she was already comfortable with. Late night, I ventured, my voice carefully neutral. She didn't look up from her phone. Yeah, told you it was a party. Her casual dismissal was like a lit match in a room full of gasoline fumes. I wanted to scream, to knock the phone from her hand and demand the truth. But I knew confrontation would only make her retreat further behind her wall of indifference. So I just nodded, the gesture feeling like a betrayal of my own sanity. I was playing a part in a play where I no longer knew my lines. Later that day, when she left to run errands, the house exhaled. I was alone with my suspicions, which had grown from nervous whispers to a deafening roar. I couldn't live in this limbo. I couldn't keep pretending that the foundation of my life wasn't crumbling beneath my feet. My hand trembled as I picked up my phone. I felt a surge of self-loathing for what I was about to do, a violation of the trust one once thought was ironclad. But her actions had already shattered that trust. I was merely picking through the shards. I opened our shared phone account online. The page was a clinical, soulless grid of dates and numbers. At first, nothing seemed out of place. But then I filtered the records by her line, and there it was. An unfamiliar number, appearing with startling frequency. Not just once or twice, but dozens of calls, hundreds of texts, stretching back weeks. Late-night texts. Midday calls during hours I knew she was supposed to be at her desk. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I copied the number, my fingers clumsy, and pasted it into my phone's dialer. I pressed the call button before I could lose my nerve. It didn't ring. It went straight to a polished, confident voicemail. Hey, this is Ryan. Leave a message. Ryan Starr. The name was a physical blow. It knocked the air from my lungs and left me gasping. I hung up, the phone slipping from my sweaty grasp onto the table. My mind, which had been cautiously exploring worst-case scenarios, now locked onto one with terrifying certainty. Ryan, the host of the party, the reason for the dress, the architect of my wife's secret life. I spent the rest of the day in a daze. The world seemed muted, distant. I went through the motions, answered emails, ate a sandwich I couldn't taste, but my thoughts were a chaotic storm. I replayed every recent interaction with Jessica, every moment of distance, every dismissive comment. They were no longer random occurrences. They were clues in a mystery I had been too blind to see. That evening, I decided to lay a trap. As she sat on the couch, phone in hand, idly scrolling, I adopted my most casual tone. "Hey Jess, who were you texting with so much last night?" She didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't even leave the screen. "What?" "No one important. Just curious." I pressed, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "Your phone was buzzing like crazy." She shrugged, a gesture of pure, unadulterated dismissal. "Just some friends making plans." "What?" "Just wondering." The ease with which she lied was breathtaking. It was a well-honed skill, and it was the final piece of evidence I needed. She was hiding something, and if I wanted the truth, I would have to take it. That night, I waited until her breathing deepened into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. The house was dark, silent. My heart pounded a guilty rhythm as I slipped out of bed and crept into the kitchen where she'd left her phone charging. The act felt sordid, a profound betrayal. But what choice did I have? Her password was my birthday. The irony was a bitter pill. The messages were all there, a chronological account of my marriage's demise. Each one was a small, sharp blade to the heart. "Ryan, can't wait to see you again, asterisk. Jessica, last night was amazing, asterisk. Ryan, you looked incredible in that dress, asterisk. Jessica, I couldn't stop thinking about you all day, asterisk." I stopped reading, a wave of nausea washing over me. There it was. The dress. Last night. Ryan. It wasn't a paranoid fantasy. It was real. She wasn't just hiding something. She was living a double life. I sat at the kitchen table in the dark for what felt like an eternity, the phone's sickly glow illuminating the wreckage of my world. A part of me, the raw, wounded part, wanted to storm into the bedroom, to wake her up and scream until my throat was raw. But another, colder part of me held me in place. This couldn't be solved with shouting. This was a demolition. I placed her phone back on the charger, my movements slow and deliberate. When I finally climbed back into bed, the space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. My mind was eerily calm, the frantic storm replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I couldn't ignore this. I couldn't rationalize it. The truth was out, a venomous snake uncoiled in the heart of our home, and there was no putting it back in its box. The next morning, I woke up with a singular, chilling clarity. The knowledge of her betrayal wasn't a weight on my chest. It was a sheet of ice encasing my heart. Jessica was still asleep, her face peaceful in the pale morning light, an image of innocence that was now a grotesque mockery. I looked at the woman I had built a life with, the person I thought I knew better than myself, and saw only a stranger. I waited for her in the kitchen. The air was thick with unspoken truths, so heavy I could barely breathe. When she walked in, wrapped in her silk robe, coffee mug in hand, she gave me a brief, tired smile. It was the smile of someone completely oblivious to the fact that their world was about to detonate. "Morning," she said lightly. I didn't answer. The words were coiled in my throat, a venomous knot waiting to strike. She frowned, her head tilting. "Are you okay?" It was the only opening I needed. "No, Jessica, I'm not okay." My voice was unnaturally calm, level, which seemed to unnerve her more than shouting would have. She froze, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward, planting my elbows on the cool granite of the island. "Who's Ryan?" Her reaction was instantaneous and telling. A flicker of pure, unadulterated panic flashed in her eyes before being immediately suppressed, replaced by a mask of practiced confusion. "Ryan? I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice rising, the ice around my heart beginning to crack. "Not anymore. I saw the messages, Jessica. All of them. I know everything." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she was utterly still, a statue carved from shock. Then, the mask shifted from confusion to indignation. "You went through my phone?" The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. "That's what you're upset about." I shot back, a bitter, incredulous laugh escaping my lips. "Not the months of sneaking around? Not the affair? You're upset about your privacy." Her expression hardened. Shock gave way to defiance. "You had no right." "Privacy," I barked, my voice echoing in the pristine kitchen. "We're married, Jessica. Or did that slip your mind while you were texting your boyfriend about how amazing your night was?" I spat the words, quoting her own betrayal back at her. Her jaw tightened. The fight seemed to go out of her, replaced by a weary resignation. It was the look of someone who had been caught and was simply tired of running. "Fine," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Yes, I've been seeing someone." The words, even expected, hit me with the force of a physical blow. Hearing them spoken aloud, in our kitchen, made the nightmare irrevocably real. "How long?" I asked, my voice a strained whisper. She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." My fist slammed down on the island, the sound cracking through the tension. "How long?" She flinched. "A few months." "A few months." Asterisk, the phrase echoed in the space between us. A few months of my misplaced trust. A few months of her calculated deceit. While I was worrying about bills and work and the quiet decay of our marriage, she had been actively building a new life, a secret world where I didn't exist. Why? The question was ripped from my throat, raw and pleading. "Why would you do this to us?" She shrugged, a small, infuriatingly casual gesture that cut me deeper than any angry word could have. "I don't know, Alex. Things, they haven't been good. For a long time. Maybe I just needed something different." "Something different," I repeated, my voice shaking with rage. "So instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix the life we built, you just outsourced it? You went behind my back and you cheated?" She rolled her eyes, and the sheer insolence of it sent a fresh wave of fury through me. "Don't act like you're some innocent victim here, Alex. Our marriage wasn't exactly a fairy tale." I stood so abruptly my chair scraped violently against the floor. "Are you seriously trying to blame me for this? You're the one who lied. You're the one who betrayed every promise we ever made." Her face remained a cool, impassive mask. "Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me, if you hadn't been so lost in your own world, I wouldn't have had to look for it somewhere else." That was it. The breaking point. The monstrous, blame-shifting audacity of her statement shattered the last vestiges of the man who had loved her. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Don't you dare put this on me. I worked. I provided. I was here. I was trying to hold this together while you were out auditioning my replacement. I gave you everything I had." She stood her ground, her arms crossed, a portrait of unrepentant defiance. Her silence was her final, most devastating weapon. "I can't do this anymore," I said, the words tasting like ash. My voice cracked on the last syllable. "I can't look at you. If you don't want to be in this marriage, then leave." Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a flicker of surprise finally breaking through her composure. "You're kicking me out." "I'm telling you to go," I said, my voice hardening into something I didn't recognize. "Because I deserve better than this. I deserve better than you." For a long, charged moment, she just stared at me. I couldn't read the expression on her face. It was a chaotic mix of anger, shock, and something else I couldn't name. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and walked out of the kitchen. A minute later, I heard the guest room door slam shut, the sound a definitive, reverberating end. The battle was over. The house was silent again. But this time, it was the clean, stark silence of absolute devastation. My marriage was over. And in the ruins, a terrifying, liberating thought began to take root. Maybe I was finally free. The aftermath was a Cold War fought in the trenches of our shared home. Jessica didn't leave right away. She retreated to the guest room, creating a separate, hostile territory within our walls. The house, once a sanctuary, became a minefield of tension. Every hallway crossed, every shared glance in the kitchen, was fraught with unspoken accusations. I had hoped the confrontation would shatter her apathy, that seeing the raw pain she'd caused would provoke some semblance of remorse. I was wrong. Her defiance hardened into a kind of regal indifference. She moved through the house as if I were a ghost, an inconvenient presence in her new reality. She was not a woman grieving a dying marriage. She was a tenant waiting for her lease to end. The final detonation occurred on the third day. I was in the living room, trying to impose order on a pile of mail, a pathetic attempt to control the one small corner of my life that hadn't been incinerated. Jessica entered, phone in hand, and perched on the arm of the couch, her thumbs swiping rhythmically across the screen. The casualness of the act, the sheer normalcy of it, was a profound insult. "Are you just going to sit there?" I began, my voice tight. and pretend that our entire life isn't on fire? She looked up, her expression one of profound boredom. What do you want me to say, Alex? How about the truth? I shot back, standing up. How about an explanation for why you felt entitled to destroy everything we built, and then act like I'm the one being unreasonable? She sighed, a theatrical exhalation of manufactured patience, and set her phone down. We've been through this. It wasn't working. You're not that blind. No, I said, my voice rising. What I knew was that we were in a rut. I knew you were distant. But I thought that was something we were supposed to fix. Together. I thought you cared enough to try. Her eyes narrowed. Don't put this all on me. You weren't exactly husband of the year, Alex. The word stopped me cold. What is that supposed to mean? She shrugged, the gesture a weapon of pure dismissal. You were checked out. You've been so wrapped up in your work, in your routines. When was the last time you really saw me? When was the last time you made me feel like I was more than just part of the furniture? I stared at her, a bitter cocktail of disbelief and fury churning in my gut. So this is my fault. This is my punishment for working hard, for providing? You're justifying an affair because I didn't pay you enough attention? I'm saying it's more complicated than you're making it out to be, she retorted, crossing her arms defensively. Maybe if I had felt wanted at home, I wouldn't have gone looking for it somewhere else. The audacity was breathtaking. For years, I had shouldered the burdens of our life, trying to build a foundation strong enough for both of us, and she was now condemning me for the calluses on my hands. Unbelievable, I whispered, shaking my head. You are truly unbelievable. I didn't give up, Jessica. I stayed. I tried. Even when it was hard. Even when you shut me out, I didn't walk away and find someone else. That was all you. She stood abruptly, her body rigid with indignation. Fine. If that's how you see it, if I'm such a monster, then maybe I should just leave. Maybe you should. I replied, my voice as cold and hard as steel. Because I can't live like this. I can't share a home with someone who has this little respect for me, for herself, for anything we ever had. She stared at me for a long, silent moment, her face unreadable. Then she turned and stormed from the room. The slam of the guest room door was an echo of the one from days before, but this one felt final. That night, I heard the distinct sounds of drawers opening and closing, the rustle of clothes, the click of suitcase latches. The next morning, she came downstairs with a single large suitcase. Her face was set, her eyes avoiding mine. I'll stay at a friend's for now, she said curtly. I'll arrange to get the rest of my things later. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I didn't help her. I didn't stop her. I just stood in the entryway and watched as she opened the front door, walked out, and closed it quietly behind her. The soft click of the latch was the most definitive sound I had ever heard. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was different. It wasn't the heavy, woolen silence of before. It was a vast, echoing emptiness. I sank onto the bottom step of the staircase, my head in my hands, as the full, crushing weight of it all descended upon me. Jessica was gone. The life I knew was over. But through the grief and the anger, a small, quiet voice whispered from a place deep within me, a place I hadn't heard from in years. Maybe this is for the best. It wasn't a comforting thought, not yet. But it was a seed. For the first time, amidst the ruins of my marriage, I felt the faint, unfamiliar possibility of building something new. In the days that followed Jessica's departure, the house felt cavernous. Every empty chair, every silent room, was a testament to my new, solitary existence. The quiet I had once craved now felt like a constant accusation. To combat it, I reached out to the one person I knew wouldn't offer platitudes or pity, my best friend, Chris. He arrived that evening armed with a six-pack of craft beer and a greasy bag of takeout burgers, a familiar peace offering for troubled times. He walked in, assessed the sterile quiet of the living room, and handed me a beer. All right, he said, settling onto the couch as if he owned it. Spill it. From the beginning. And I did. The words poured out of me in a torrent. The dress, the party, the phone records, the confrontation, her blame-shifting defense, the final, quiet departure. Chris listened intently, his usual jovial expression slowly hardening into a grim line. Man, he said when I finally fell silent, shaking his head. I knew something was off with her the last few times we all hung out. She had this brittle energy. But this is next level. Tell me about it. I muttered, taking a long pull from my bottle. He studied me for a moment. The important thing is, how are you? I shrugged, the gesture feeling inadequate. I don't know. Angry. Hurt. Confused. I feel like I've been living in a completely different reality than she has. I keep replaying everything, trying to find the moment I missed, the thing I should have done. Stop, Chris said, his voice firm, cutting through my spiral. Stop that right now. This is not on you. You can't control another person's choices, Alex. She made hers. They were selfish and destructive, and they have nothing to do with your worth. His certainty was an anchor in my storm of self-doubt. So what now? I asked, the question hanging in the air. Now. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Now you breathe. You let yourself feel angry and hurt. You don't have to have a 5-year plan by tomorrow. For now, you just survive this. One day at a time. The next morning, I woke up with Chris's words echoing in my head. She made her choices. It was time for me to make mine. I found the number for a reputable family law attorney online and made the call. I'd like to schedule a consultation, I said to the receptionist, the words feeling foreign and sharp in my mouth. About filing for divorce. Saying it aloud didn't feel like a defeat. It felt like the first step toward reclaiming my own life. The lawyer, a calm, no-nonsense man named Marcus, walked me through the stark mechanics of dismantling a life. Assets, accounts, disclosures. It was a cold, clinical process that stood in brutal contrast to the emotional chaos raging inside me. As I sat in his minimalist office, I made another decision. I couldn't move forward while living in a museum of our failed marriage. That weekend, I began the painful ritual of packing up Jessica's life. I started with the closet, pulling down her clothes and boxing them up with a cold, detached efficiency. It was in the spare room, at the desk she'd claimed as her own, that I found the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. Her laptop. It sat there, closed but unlocked. A Pandora's box I knew I shouldn't open. But the need for a full accounting, for the unvarnished truth, was a sickness in me. I opened it. Her email was still logged in. A folder labeled Simply Personal beckoned. The emails inside were not just evidence of an affair, they were blueprints for a new life. From Ryan, dated 2 months prior. Asterisk, I can't wait for us to finally be together. These next few weeks will be hard, but it'll be worth it in the end. I promise, asterisk. From Jessica, asterisk, I keep thinking about the house by the lake. Just the two of us. Alex doesn't make me happy anymore. You're the only thing that feels real, asterisk. They had been planning this. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a calculated, premeditated escape. She hadn't just cheated on me. She had been actively plotting her exit while I was at home, trying to figure out why my wife seemed so sad. Then I found the photos. Hidden in a cloud storage folder were dozens of pictures of them together, at wineries, on hiking trails, kissing in front of a sunset. They looked happy, carefree. They looked like a couple building a future. I slammed the laptop shut, a strangled cry of rage and pain escaping my lips. The betrayal was so much deeper, so much more absolute than I had ever imagined. This knowledge, as agonizing as it was also a strange and terrible gift. It cauterized the wound. It burned away any lingering doubt, any shred of hope that this was a salvageable tragedy. It wasn't. It was a demolition. I finished packing her things with a renewed, grim purpose. I boxed up the photos, the books, the little trinkets that had once been symbols of our shared life. I left the laptop on top of the last box, a silent testament to her true character. When Chris came over that night and I told him what I'd found, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes full of a fierce loyalty that I hadn't realized how much I needed. Good, he said, his voice low. Good. I asked, confused. Yeah, good. Now you know. Now there's no more wondering, no more what-ifs. She showed you exactly who she is. Now you can finally let her go. And he was right. The truth, in all its ugly glory, had set me free. Jessica hadn't just left our marriage. She had never truly been in it, not for a long time. I wasn't the problem. I was just the last person to find out. Weeks later, my phone buzzed with her name. My stomach lurched, a phantom limb of old anxieties. I answered, my voice a cold, flat line. Alex, she began, her voice small, hesitant. I was hoping we could talk. Maybe meet for coffee. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I met her at a neutral downtown coffee shop. She looked tired, diminished. The defiant, arrogant woman from our final confrontations was gone, replaced by someone who looked haunted. I wanted to apologize, she said, staring into her cup. What I did, it was wrong. There's no excuse. I was unhappy and I was a coward, and I hurt you. I am so sorry. I listened to the words. They sounded sincere. A month ago, they might have shattered me or given me false hope. But now, they were just sounds. I accept your apology, Jessica, I said, and I meant it. I accepted it not for her, but for me. It was the final piece of baggage I needed to set down. But it doesn't change anything. We're done. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I know. I needed you to hear it. She stood to leave, pausing for a moment. I hope you find happiness, Alex. You deserve it. You too, Jessica, I said. I watched her walk out of the coffee shop and out of my life. There was no anger left, no burning rage. There was only a quiet, sad finality. The war was over. The months that followed were about reconstruction. With Marcus handling the legalities and Chris providing the moral support, I began the slow, arduous process of rebuilding. I reclaimed my house, room by room. I painted the walls, bought new furniture, and filled the silence with music that I loved. I rediscovered old hobbies, dusted off my camera, and spent weekends hiking trails, finding solace in the quiet grandeur of nature. Healing wasn't a straight line. There were days when the loneliness was a physical ache, nights when the ghosts of old memories whispered in the dark. But for every step back, I took two forward. I was learning to be alone, and discovering that it was not the same as being lonely. I was learning to be myself again, not one half of a broken whole. It was on one of those hiking trips with a group Chris had dragged me into that I met Rachel. She wasn't anything like Jessica. She was quiet, but quick to laugh, with kind eyes and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. We talked for hours, walking side by side on a sun-dappled trail. It was easy. There was no pretense, no agenda. Our first date was coffee. Our second was a walk in the park. We took things slow, building a foundation on conversation and shared laughter, not on grand romantic gestures. I told her about my marriage, not as a sob story, but as a part of my history, a scar that had healed over. She listened without judgment. One evening, we were sitting on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. The silence between us was nothing like the one I had shared with Jessica. This was a comfortable, peaceful silence, filled not with absence, but with a shared sense of contentment. You seem happy, she said softly, her head resting on my shoulder. I thought about it for a moment. The long, dark night of the soul I had endured. The betrayal, the anger, the slow, painful process of putting myself back together. I am, I said, and the truth of the words surprised me with their simple power. I really am. The end of my marriage hadn't been the end of my story. It had been a brutal, necessary fire that had cleared away the dead wood, making way for new growth. I had walked through the ruins and, on the other side, found not just survival, but a quiet, resilient hope. It was a new beginning, and I was ready for it.